let's get started on this amazing journey with our very special speaker today. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining our Women for Solutions webinar. We are proud to say that we have over 136 webinars where we create awareness, we connect, we learn, we inspire, but most important, we want to reimagine our new world that is coming. And I'm Laura Jadru-Koch, founder of Women for Solution, a global network of thousands of women worldwide in more than 40 countries, where we share, we inspire, and find simple and effective solutions towards what we call the caring economy. Because in the end, we choose our tools to really grow into our caring economy. Today, we have a truly inspiring topic that I am very passionate about. That is, our speaker is Scilla, Dr. Scilla Elworthy. She is an amazing woman. For more than 50 years, she has really created impact. Actually, she started even at 13 years old, making a difference. So you will hear from her amazing journey from starting with small groups of change in areas in Africa, in Asia, locally, to then nuclear weapons. I mean, she has the most amazing and broad experience where she really has created impact. And she was nominated 3 times as Nobel Peace winner, and on her work with the Oxford Research, and has developed amazing dialogues and tools to really move forward policymakers towards peace. And today, in her Business Plan for Peace, an amazing book that everybody should read, and all her actions, she really has transformed the world and the lives of many. And she has, in her recent or not so recent TED Talk, she has more than 1.5 million viewers, because it's a truly inspiring work. And her incredible laser focus books, of which I recommend all of you to read, because each one has incredible depth. And also, she has been an advisor to Peter Gabriel, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Sir Richard Branson, for example, in setting up this amazing group of the elders. And so with that, I want to say, Scilla, we are so proud to have you here. But before that, we need to be energized. And how we do this in Women for Solution is we put our shoulders back, we make our eyes twinkle with joy and determination, and with a super wide smile. Scilla, the line is all yours to share your wisdom.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I'm delighted to be here with you and to reach out to your various networks. And I think what you wanted me to talk about was how to transform anger into positive power. So if you like, I can start there, and then we can just go wherever it leads us. Because anger is something which is really mounting in many, many women worldwide who are realizing that for thousands of years we have been marginalized. That's the minimum word I would ever use. We have been punished, we have been beaten, we've been raped, we've been murdered, just because we're women. And more especially when we raise our voices or oppose the system that is there. And it's tragic, the effect that this has had on our planet for a number of reasons. And one is because women Are we getting some offline noises? Is that because people aren't muted, do you think, Laura?
No, we're good.
I think one of the reasons why it's tragic that women have been so excluded is that we do have an affinity with our planet. We call it Mother Earth. And we know that our cycles are tuned to the moon. So we are very close to nature. And that means that we both care very much about nature, and we're also able to see the whole system of the planet as one interconnected entity. So I just want to backtrack a little further back than what I was describing just now, which is that we women have been so severely marginalized and left out of decision making because it was not always so. If you go back into prehistory, as the brilliant historian Anne Baring has done in her book called The Dream of the Cosmos, she takes us back into prehistory, and for 22,000 years, right back to the beginning of any knowledge about human beings, the female was worshipped. All the artifacts that go back to 22,000, 28,000 before Christ are of great big goddess figures, fecund, able, nourishing, wonderfully protective as well. And for all those years, right down through the ages when nomads became more settled, when agriculture began, all through right down until about 4,000 years before Christ, the main deity that humans worship was the goddess for all that time. And then for many reasons, partly because of the invention of weapons and the ownership of land in agriculture, wars began, and the goddess was gradually replaced by the father god in all the different religions. And so I just want to put this in context, because when we're talking about anger, we're talking about what's been wrong for about, let's say, about 5,000 years of our history, not for all time. And when I first realized this in about 1995, it changed my view of feminism completely, because I thought up to then that we women invented feminism, and we didn't. The female has been adored, worshipped, consulted, and revered for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and has guided humanity. So coming back to the modern times and anger, when we are furiously angry, if we've been, shall we say, insulted or judged or attacked, what we feel as women is, rightly so, it's anger. But when you spray your anger out at somebody and throw in a match, you get an inferno, and people get hurt, badly hurt.
Yeah, and I love it when you mention that anger is like a oil or petrol that you
gasoline, yeah.
gasoline.
And then what you do is, instead of spraying it out like that, you put it in your engine. So you put your anger inside and you let it fuel you. Because what I found is, when I sprayed my anger around, I really got nowhere. I just got bad reactions and furious reactions, and things escalated. But now what I do when I feel this huge anger, I put it inside and let it energize me. It enables me to get up in the morning. It enables me to keep going, to do what I need to do. And that is a vital ingredient to my own energy. So I strongly recommend that we women do that with our anger. And then it becomes a power that we have rather than a weapon.
So yeah, I mean that, because can you tell us in a few words, you have an incredible vision of how do we learn hate? And if you can tell, because if you can tell us more about how does hate become anger, and is it a productive tool? You just describe it as anger could be a very productive tool, but where does hate come that it really provokes us into situations of war, maybe, or
Yeah.
divorce, or group battle.
What we find is that hate and the violence that it provokes is usually motivated by humiliation. Humiliation is the biggest driver of armed violence in the world. And what we've discovered is that the fastest antidote to this kind of anger and violence is respect. Why? Because respect is the antidote to humiliation. And that's why women need and should be paid respect now. If I may, Laura, I'll illustrate that with a story that comes out of Iraq. In 2003, after the American invasion of Iraq, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes was leading his men down a street in Najaf. And Laura, is there any way we can turn off all these people logging in? It's making a lot of offside noise.
I will try.
Yeah,
sorry.
Thank you. If you can just get people to mute or get the whole...
Everybody muted. Is when somebody comes in, it makes a noise, but this is the first time I have this. We will make sure to change that.
Okay. So Chris Hughes was leading his men down a street in Najaf when you still could lead a foot patrol down a street in Iraq. And out of the houses on both sides and the mosques came furiously angry men, screaming and shouting in Arabic and bursting with rage and outrage. And the young American soldiers who didn't speak any Arabic were frankly terrified. They tried not to show it. And Chris Hughes realized that this was a massacre in the making, either that the men would be lynched or that they would use their automatic weapons and it would, many people would be killed. And so he strode into the middle of the whole thing and he gave his men an order that they had never heard before: kneel. And so they wobbled to the ground with their heavy backpacks and their helmets and put their weapons in the sand, faced the barrels of their weapons in the sand, and bowed their heads, and the whole crowd grew silent. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, everybody went home. Now,
that shows incredible depth and courage of this colonel.
Yes. Well, what he knew, whether he knew it consciously or not, I don't know, but he knew that there must have been a situation where these villagers were humiliated. And he knew that the strongest antidote to humiliation is respect. And so he commanded his men to take this gesture of respect, bowing their heads and putting their weapons in the sand, and it worked. And so I think that's a good, it's a good lesson for us to learn, and to temper our anger by looking for the humiliation, and pointing that out, and saying to whoever has insulted us or humiliated us, that is what we're feeling. And normally that would drive us to anger and maybe even violence. But what we're doing is becoming aware of it, and we would like them to use the antidote for what they have just done and show us respect. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And in your book, The Pioneers of Possibility, another book that I highly recommend everybody to women and men, because it has incredible value. Can you tell us, following on this story, about the inner works, about the dealing with your inner self-critic that you mentioned so many times? Because you always mention that to start peace, we have to start internally. If you want to share a little bit about your skills on that and how to develop those skills.
Well, we know that the people who are the greatest peace builders in the world are people who have done the inner work. By inner work, what do I mean? I mean self-knowledge, self-awareness. I mean developing a sense of presence, which you can't do without some kind of daily practice of self-inspection. And once we develop this, whether that practice is actually meditation, or whether it's yoga, or whether it's walking in nature, if you can do that, or whether it's spending time quietly with an animal or a very young child, it's being able to go inwards and breathe and simply observe observe the heart. Because we spend most of our time, don't we, Laura, in the head. We think that our brain is what is right. And actually, the HeartMath Institute has shown this, that the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And those messages are profoundly wise, the messages of the heart. You know that, I know that. When we listen to the heart, what we find there is wisdom. And therefore, one of the best ways of transforming our anger is to become quiet and listen to the heart. It takes a bit of practice.
I know. I think that in our course of non-flict, we always say if there's one thing that matters is to learn active listening. Do you want to give us a little bit of background of what active listening is on your view and how to put it in practice?
Yeah. Well, we all think we're good listeners, and most of us are not. In fact, when I was working with a very big company, the CEO asked me to address her global vice presidents. And there were 26 of them, mostly French aristocrats. And so I began the session by saying to them, we're going to learn about listening. And they looked bored, and they kind of said things like, well, of course we know how to listen. We listen to our staff, they used the word staff, all the time. We know everything there is to know about listening. We don't need that. And I said, okay, well, let's just check. And so I asked them to undertake an exercise in pairs where they had to sit opposite one another with their knees about 6 inches apart, uncross their legs and arms, and one partner would ask the other partner a question, a very deep question, like, tell me, what is your full, highest potential? And then the other person would speak for 5 minutes while the questioner would listen. And at the end of 5 minutes, the the questioner would feed back to the speaker what he or she had heard. And if it was correct, that's fine. And then they would change over. If not, the speaker could correct. Well, at the end of 3 rounds of this, they were white-faced. They were kind of like, oh, because they realized that their listening skills were very, very inadequate. So most of us, when we think we're listening, what we do is think about what our response would be, say, oh, I know about that, I've had one of those, or we would agree and want to interrupt with our own story, or we would contradict, thinking, oh, that's just rubbish, I don't believe that at all. And we're not really listening, and we're certainly not listening for the emotions behind the words. So what we teach, and it's very, very simple, is to say to anybody, and you can use this in a family quarrel or a difficulty at work or a community issue, you say to the person concerned with whom you might have a difference of opinion, you can say, would you be willing, it's those 4 words that are key to everything, would you be willing to spend half an hour with me? And for the first 5 minutes, I will listen carefully to what you feel about the conflict that we have. And I ask you to speak in the first person, not accusing. And then when you've finished, I will feed back to you what I've heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then we'll change over, and I will speak for 5 minutes about how I perceive our differences, and you will listen and then feed back to me. And I'll tell you if you got it right or not. And in this way, what happens is we move from the brain that says, I'm right and she's wrong, to the heart that says, oh my God, is that how you feel? And then when we do that, we have a bridge over which we can walk to find what we agree about, to find some commonality. And so that's one way to use listening as a methodology to transform anger.
Beautiful. And what I find fascinating that I read your book, Mighty Heart, your latest book, and I read it twice because I find it has so much value. So I recommend it to everybody to read this book. It's a short and incredibly powerful in skill building. Can you tell us more about your views about education on conflict resolution? Have you seen a country that has implemented really solid conflict resolutions initiatives and that actually is seeing results? And tell us about your experience on education specifically on conflict resolution.
Well, I think the best and the very well tried and tested technique that I know is called NVC, nonviolent communication. I'm sure you know it, but it was invented by Marshall Rosenberg, and he began to teach it about 30 years ago, maybe more, 40 years ago. He wrote a wonderful book, and I think it's just called Nonviolent Communication. And basically it goes through 3 stages. First of all, observing what we're feeling. So if you and I, Laura, had a difference of opinion, I and you would first of all observe what we feel. Then we would say to one another what we're feeling. And then we would be able to progress onto the issue of needs. What is it? This is what I feel, and this is what I need in this case. For example, I might be feeling ignored, and therefore my feeling is shame. What have I done wrong? It's an unbearable feeling, shame. And so what I need is some token of reassurance. I need some little gesture of recognition or reassurance. And then, so I would then make a request of you. So it goes observations, feelings, needs, requests. And I think it's the most powerful thing that children can learn in school. In fact, it is part of the education system in some countries. I think it should be in nursery education for every child, because children love it. They take to it like ducks to water. And then they go off home and teach their parents. If their parents are squabbling, they say to them, observations, feelings, needs, requests. And it's simple, it's easy to learn. It's not always easy to do, but it is the most wonderful technique.
Definitely, we will definitely be giving everybody a list of all the books you're recommending, as well as your books that are amazing. But we only have another 30 minutes and so many questions are coming up. But let me ask you about today, the pandemic. You know, this is a unique moment that we can, you know, become the humans we all want to be, or not. Where do you think we can start this journey to improve everybody's life towards our momentum of change in our society? What are you doing today in your initiatives that are leading towards this?
Well, the big one is obviously that it's a wake-up call, the pandemic. I believe very strongly that the pandemic is almost capable of being a saving grace for humanity, because we have ignored our planet and hurt it and ravaged it and poisoned it for centuries now. And if we go on doing this, it'll be the end of the human race. The earth will not support us any longer. And if I were Mother Nature, I would be saying, I sent you floods and you took no notice. I sent you fires last year and you took no notice. You haven't changed your ways. I have been mined. I have been blown up by your explosives. I have been, my trees have been felled all over the world. My oceans are dying through plastic that you've poured into them. And so finally, I am going to send you a pandemic that may, because it will hit your pocketbook, it may bring you to your senses. So I believe this is a final wake-up call on the part of nature. And what it's calling us to do is to slow down, to stop rushing about. It has made us stop rushing about. Or I don't know about where you live, but where I live in England, it's lockdown. We can't move. So we have to slow down. Second step is to stop consuming, to stop this idiotic knee-jerk reaction we have when we're stressed, just to go and spend money and buy things, stuff ourselves with goods that we don't need, with food that we can't eat, and gasoline that is pointless to use these days. So what we're being asked to do is take more exercise, to get out in the fresh air, to value nature, and to grow vegetables. When the pandemic first hit this time last year, my little friend, who's 6 years old, was not able to go to school. School closed, his nursery school closed. So I said to him, Jack, would you like to grow a beanstalk? Because we have a story in English, Jack and the Beanstalk. And he said, oh yeah. So I said, okay, get yourself a plastic pot and some earth, and I will give you some beans, and we will meet on Monday and online on Zoom, and we'll grow a bean together. And word got around to his friends. And by Monday at 2 o'clock, we had 16 children and their parents in their houses, all with a plastic pot and some compost. And we'd managed to get a bean to each of them. So I said to the children, now we're going to plant these beans, but you've got to talk to them first. You've got to talk to your bean, make friends with it, tell your bean your name, give it a name if you want, and ask it if it would be willing to grow nicely for you. And then you put it in the earth like so. You put some water, you put it in a light place where it gets some light, and we'll meet again next Monday and see what's happened. And I just crossed my fingers that the bean would respond and it would be warm enough for them. And sure enough, the following Monday, there were these excited children all over the area, all rushing to the camera to show me their little shoot of bean. And so they demanded another lesson the following week. Anyway, we grew watercress, we grew spinach, we grew peas, and they all became little gardeners, and they started getting their parents involved. So they made their parents dig up the backyard and let them plant things all over the backyard. Now, the point of all this is that I believe there will come a time when the supermarkets will not have food. And if that's the case, we all need to know how to grow vegetables. And children love it. So that's my pandemic story. And I'm sure everybody has their own pandemic stories, but it's such an invitation to us all to help each other, to become more noticing of what other people need, and be more caring, more to have if you like, a currency of compassion, to actually put a value on taking care of our neighbors, the older people, the vulnerable people, and giving, not taking, giving whatever we can in the form of compassion, kindness, and thoughtfulness of what other people need.
I think that what you're saying is so beautiful, because in a few places in your books you mentioned that now we're leaving behind the economy of taking, and we're moving towards an economy of giving. And when we started this conversation today, you mentioned that you're writing a book about no longer the feminism or the yang energy, but about the right brain. And that is something that we men and women all have, but we in the last maybe 10,000 years, as you mentioned originally, we have mostly gone to our left brain for where there's competition, violence. There's a lot of issues that have led us to, let's say now, maybe eradicate some type of poverty and things like that, computers, technology. But now we need to shift. Can you tell us more about the book you're writing? What is your message in that book?
Well, it's an extension of The Mighty Heart, which the subtitle is How to Transform Conflict. And this is a much longer version. It's fully illustrated. It's got lots and lots of stories in it. But I always used to have a module in it called Feminine Intelligence or Yin Intelligence. And I found that many of our male participants were put off by that. They felt a bit excluded, and we don't want to exclude people. And so I thought about it hard, and I started to read everything I could find on neuroscience. And the new neuroscience of the brain really has studied carefully the left brain and the right brain. And what they find is that the neurons in the left brain, that's the left brain is the thinking, rational, combative and actually quite competitive side of our nature. It's where I'm right and you're wrong resides. It's argument, it's linear thinking. Nothing wrong with it, but it gets out of balance with the right brain, because the right brain is often a bit ignored in our society, because the right brain is intuition, it's compassion, it's collaboration. It's what Desmond Tutu, who I worked with for several years in the development of the elders, what Desmond Tutu calls Ubuntu, which is a Southern African expression for I am because you are. I am because you are. In other words, we are all one. And so the right brain is really the heart. And it's the one that sees things as a whole instead of just our little tunnel view. And most of the time, we ignore the right brain. We only fall back on it when we need to use our intuition. Our intuition is a very big part of our right brain. And I don't know about you all, but when I have overridden my intuition, that's when I've made the biggest mistakes of my life. So intuition is a very key function of the right brain and often underestimated.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of studies, and we at Women for Solutions are really moving towards something called the left. We say we women need to move our society more to think on our right brain. And I always joke that said, because women use mostly the right brain, and generally women are right. That's how you remember right between left and right brain. And so I think that one of the things you're also mentioning here with the evolution of your thought about anger towards intuition, right brain, is a key element of our society is trust. And so how does our right brain work with trust and active listening?
Well, I think the right brain tends to be more interested in other people, in the environment, the atmosphere as you walk into a room. That's what the right brain's interested in. And so it has much more of a whole picture. And it's really a very useful barometer to use when we're trying to make decisions, to be able to see things as a whole. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Laura. What did you really want to know? Tell me.
One of the key elements of our society is trust. If we do not foster trust between us, that's how we lose track of our loved ones,
yeah.
And so if you can, how through your methods do you build trust in a family environment where there's been anger and conflict, or in a community, or in a country?
Oh, I think building trust, it takes example, but it's also, for example, if you have a community meeting, a meeting in your village or your town or your environment where a decision has to be made, it's a pity to start the meeting just very formally, but the way that really connects people is to start with 2 or 3 minutes, just complete quiet. So everybody can arrive and realize where they are. And then to get each person to introduce themselves with the answer to the question, how are you really? Not how did you get here and what did your granny say, but how are you really? Are you sad? Are you happy? And in that way, we begin to relate to the other people in the room, some of whom we may never have met before. It's also a great way to begin family gatherings when we're allowed to have them again. So to ask each member of the family to just say, how are you really now? What are you feeling? And that allows us to stop thinking about how somebody is dressed, or have they become better behaved, or whatever it is. It enables us to relate to that person as they are. And that builds trust immediately. And I think parents can build trust with their children by telling them the truth, because nothing is more confusing to a child than not feeling they can believe what their parent has told them. So as much as possible to give children the best and the most suitable truth that we can, that's about whatever it is their question is about. And I think that definitely builds trust.
Thank you. That was really a very beautiful way of sharing how trust is built in a family, and then it can be transferred to a community. But what are your thoughts on collective political anger? And it's a question from Marisa Salarkov.
I would refer you here to what's happening in Myanmar right now as we speak. I don't know if you've kept up with the news, but into my inbox every moment is coming news of what is happening in what used to be called Burma, where the army, as you probably know, has cracked down very violently on all public protest. It's arrested a lot of people, killed people. And what the public is doing is quite magnificent. They're insisting on no violence, but turning out in their millions to protest. But they're also being very ingenious. And they're using NVC. What they're doing is trying to completely immobilize the traffic in the big cities. So they're telling people, if you have a car or a vehicle, go out in it, stop, open the front, the bonnet, what we call the bonnet of the engine, prop it up, and walk away with the keys. Lock the car and walk away with the keys. And even bus drivers are doing this. So they're blocking the streets with thousands of abandoned cars. That means that the military, in their tanks, cannot charge down the street and get to wherever people are protesting. So that means that the areas of mass protest are remaining peaceful. They are full of banners and people wearing masks, as they are required to do, not to spread disease. But it's meaning that the army have no excuse for arresting people or shooting at them.
Yeah,
and I think
it's like preventing
sorry?
Tiananmen Square, because that would have happened, no?
Yeah, that would have happened, exactly. And I think it'll go down in history as the most remarkable methodology of millions of people to oppose an extremely militarized and potentially very violent government.
So this is it feeds again and again to this incredible movement of our society today that I find it very positive, that societies are actually are trying to really push despotic leaders, are trying to, like, for example, what happened in Egypt, all these, that social media is helping to create transparency, create more awareness. Do you think that we are leading the right way on this elements of moving towards better democracies, where people are really, through COVID, through all the things that are happening today in such intensity, we are becoming more connected with who we are, and thus, as a society, as a world, will become more democratic?
I think there's two things happening here, Laura. One is that, yes, particularly young people and what you would call the grassroots, the social organizing at the level of community is very much stronger than it ever has been, and very much better organized through social media. But whereas at the top, the despotic leaders, the Trumps of this world and the Putins, are becoming more and more violent and anxious and provoking violence. And so from the top down, there are probably more right-wing despotic government leaders now than there have been for quite some time. But on the other hand, the grassroots is getting far better organized, and getting better organized with non-violent methodologies of making their wishes known to their leaders. I think that's what's happening. But at the moment, it's you know, there are still military crackdowns where large numbers, like in Nagorno-Karabakh recently, and in many, many countries, particularly in the Congo in Africa, for example, there's huge violence by rogue militias, small armies that are out of control, that are just causing havoc. A lot of women are getting raped, and terrible, terrible violence. There's a lot of violence in Eritrea at the moment. Many, many countries still recovering from the three major wars of our century. You know, the three major wars that we've seen since the turn of the century, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Vast, vast amounts of money poured into weaponry and troops, invasion troops, and none of those problems have been solved by military means. Each of those countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, is in a worse state than it was before a military attempt was made to deal with the issues. So,
but Scilla, you mentioned several times in your book that when women get involved, magic happens. Can you tell us the theory, the research about this, and how you've seen it in effect that this can happen?
yeah, well, the UN did a study of how many women are present at peace negotiations, and they found that on average, there were only 2.5% of those sitting around a peace table negotiating were women. Result, the peace agreements reached lasted only 5 years. As soon as that percentage rose to 10%, the agreement lasted a further 15 years. And I thought to myself, what? How, why? And then I realized that when you have a violent conflict, it starts with an atrocity which causes terror and deep fear. And the fear sort of solidifies into anger. And if nothing is done, the cycle of violence goes around through the need for revenge, retaliation, and then there's going to be another atrocity, and the cycle of violence goes around again. So what women tend to do is to look after the fallout of war. It's women very often who are left to bury the dead. Women look after the orphans that have been created by the war, the post-traumatic stress syndrome. Women look after the debris of war, if you like. So when women come to the negotiating table, they bring those concerns. They bring the need for money to be spent on looking after the children, looking after the elderly, the wounded, the people who've lost limbs, and that thereby stopping the cycle of violence going round again. Whereas if it's just left to the warlords to negotiate peace, what they're really interested in is territory, money, power, position, and nothing gets solved. The war goes on.
So fantastic. Yeah, exactly. So basically, in many countries now, women are really addressing the issue that they want to be part of of government and be on the tables of decisions, not only in companies, in governments, and I think that that's moving quite rapidly today. We have only 10 minutes left, and I would like to know if there's any closing remarks you want to share and tell us more about the book you're writing, because really interesting making in learning more about it so that we can all read it in depth.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for the questions you've asked, Laura. They've been very nice questions to answer. This latest book is it's a rewrite. Last year, in fact, 1st of January, I had this premonition that something was coming towards humanity that was huge. I didn't know it was a pandemic. I just knew that we were going to need all the skills that we had. And so I sat down and wrote, and it just poured out for 2 weeks. I wrote everything I knew and everything all my colleagues know about how to transform conflict, because I knew we were going to need these skills. And very quickly, we published this little book called The Mighty Heart. And that was the first edition. It's now in its 3rd or 4th edition. And the book I'm writing at the moment is going to be a big one, like that size. And it's going to be packed full of the kind of stories I've been telling you, firsthand accounts, interviews I've done with the experience I've had working, for example, with Nelson Mandela and Mary Robinson, one of the great peace builders of the world. And so it's just full of the kind of anecdotes I've been telling you that seem to help us all understand that using weapons to try and resolve conflict is utterly and completely counterproductive, expensive, and stupid. So that's my main message, I think.
Yeah, because in your book, you mentioned that we have spent in every year, we spend trillions in the double digits on war. And COVID, we have spent more than 4 trillion already in worldwide. And just to solve hunger and poverty, we just need a few billion. That will be peanuts compared to what is being spent to keep power or by a few and really move forward towards a more cooperative type of world. And on also, if you can mention to us in this, you mentioned one of the things I find fascinating is neuroscience. And you mentioned in this new book you will talk about neuroscience. what resources are you focusing on that you find the most useful for us to read and to get more involved in?
Well, I think it's the book I've just discovered, which I think is the simplest and most wonderful book. It's called No Self, No Problem. And it's by a man called Chris Niebauer. And it's just a little book, but it so simply explains the difference between the left brain and the right brain, and how to access the right brain, the heart. And it's just a lovely book. And I'm afraid I have a call coming in 3 minutes, Laura. So I have to sadly say goodbye to you all, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much for this incredible conversation, inspiring, and all the magic you are spreading through the world. We will make sure that many of us will follow through on on what you're doing, and maybe a last thing you can tell us about the courses you are giving about peacemaking, so that we might register. And we'll put that in our to all the people who registered, and so that they can see.
Okay, well, the course can be found on if you look on the Mighty Heart, under the website, the business plan for peace.org. And that's where you find the details of the Mighty Heart courses. And we can also, and you can also look on my personal website, just my name, and you'll find most of this information there. So thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to go, but it's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for everybody on the line, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure you're all have been given a bit of peacemaking. And what I want to announce is we have a upcoming webinar by Marisa Salabak, who's here on the line, who will share about the issues on gender and gender equality, and how to deal with gender in businesses and organizations. And Marisa will tell us a little bit about it. And yes, Marisa?
Actually, I will touch into gender, but the focus is really going to be on advancing racial equity. And so what we really want to do is look at racial and ethnic equity, and that will also include the intersectionality of gender equity. But that is what we will begin to explore and look at how we can begin to advance those in our organizations, in our families, and in our communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Marisa. And to all of you, we are what Women for Solution is doing also is we're creating a gender equality or gender parity courses for everybody in because what we notice is that most women need to learn more about a history of the rights of women, the history of our archetypes, and because with deep conviction of what we are about, and how we can move towards a more equitable, collaborative, compassionate, and trust world where competition is where win-win situations are moved towards, or from win to lose to win-win situations for everybody. We will find that we will move into what we want to live as a dream for today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll see you on the 2nd of March with Marisa.